Marcus Thompson had always been a man of few words. At 32, he worked the night shift at the city's largest construction company, operating heavy machinery while the world slept. His calloused hands gripped the controls of bulldozers and excavators with practiced ease, moving tons of earth and concrete as if they were mere toys. But those same hands trembled when he tried to write a simple text message or make a phone call to anyone outside his immediate work circle. The irony wasn't lost on him that he spent his days literally digging graves for buildings' foundations, creating empty spaces that would soon be filled with life and activity. Meanwhile, his own life felt increasingly hollow, carved out by years of self-imposed isolation. Marcus lived alone in a small apartment above Mrs. Chen's grocery store, where the only sounds were the hum of refrigerators below and the occasional late-night delivery truck rumbling past. His childhood had taught him that silence was safety. Growing up with an alcoholic father who swung between violent rages and cold indifference, Marcus learned early that speaking up brought trouble. His mother, overwhelmed and broken, had retreated into her own world of prescription pills and afternoon soap operas. By the time Marcus turned 16, he had perfected the art of becoming invisible, moving through his house like a ghost, speaking only when directly addressed, and even then, in the fewest words possible. School had been a nightmare of social expectations he couldn't meet. While other kids formed friendships and navigated the complex web of teenage relationships, Marcus sat alone at lunch, ate quickly, and spent his free periods in the library's farthest corner. Teachers often forgot he was in their classes because he never raised his hand, never asked questions, and turned in his work without fanfare. He was the human equivalent of background noise, present but unnoticed. After high school, while his classmates headed off to college or started families, Marcus found work in construction. The physical labor suited him. There was something honest about moving earth, pouring concrete and building structures that would outlast him. The work crew was rough around the edges but respected results over conversation. As long as Marcus showed up on time, worked hard, and didn't cause problems, they left him alone. It was exactly what he wanted. Years passed in this comfortable routine of isolation. Marcus would wake up at sunset, eat a simple dinner while watching the news, and head to the construction site. He operated his machinery with skill and precision, taking pride in the smooth cuts he made into the earth and the perfect grades he achieved for foundation work. His supervisor, Big Jim Morrison, was a gruff man who appreciated Marcus's reliability and never pushed him to join the crew for after-work drinks or weekend barbecues. The other workers had long since stopped trying to include Marcus in their conversations. They would nod respectfully when he arrived each night and bid him a quiet goodbye when his shift ended at dawn. Some of the newer guys would occasionally try to strike up conversations, asking about his weekend plans or whether he wanted to grab breakfast after work. Marcus's responses were always polite but brief, and eventually they too learned to leave him be. Marcus' apartment reflected his personality perfectly. It was clean but sparse, functional but devoid of personal touches. A small kitchen table, where he ate his meals alone, a worn couch where he watched television before work, and a bed where he slept during the day while the rest of the world bustled about their lives. No photographs hung on the walls, no plants brightened the windowsills, and no answering machine blinked with messages from friends or family. His grocery shopping followed the same pattern every week. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who owned the store below his apartment, would smile warmly and try to engage him in conversation about the weather or neighborhood happenings. Marcus would respond with polite nods and single-word answers, pay for his simple groceries in cash, and retreat upstairs. Mrs. Chen had long ago given up trying to draw him out, but she still watched him with concerned eyes, perhaps recognizing a loneliness that matched her own since her husband's death 3 years earlier. The neighborhood around Marcus's apartment was changing. Young families were moving in, attracted by the affordable rent and proximity to downtown. Children's laughter echoed in the courtyard below his window, and the sound made something twist uncomfortably in his chest. He would close his windows and turn up the television to drown out the reminders of the life he had never learned how to live. Marcus told himself he was content with his solitary existence. He had work that provided purpose and income, a roof over his head, and no complications from other people's drama or expectations. He didn't have to worry about disappointing anyone or being disappointed himself. His emotional landscape was as carefully controlled and maintained as the construction sites he worked on each night. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn when his shift ended and he walked home through empty streets, Marcus wondered what it would feel like to have someone waiting for him. Not necessarily a romantic partner, though that thought occasionally surfaced, but simply another human being who would notice if he didn't come home one day. Someone who would wonder where he was, who would miss his presence, however quiet it might be. That these thoughts never lasted long. Marcus had learned to push them down with the same efficiency he used to operate his machinery. Wanting things he couldn't have was a luxury he had trained himself not to indulge. It was easier to focus on the concrete reality of his work, the satisfaction of a job well done, and the predictable rhythm of his solitary life. As winter settled over the city, Marcus continued his nightly routine, unaware that his carefully constructed world of silence and isolation was about to be shattered by an event that would force him to choose between the safety of his self-imposed grave and the terrifying possibility of truly living. The foundation he had built his life on was solid but shallow, and sometimes the most unexpected tremors could bring down even the most carefully constructed walls. The first time Marcus noticed Sarah Martinez, she was arguing with her landlord outside the apartment building next to his. It was a Tuesday morning in late November, and he was returning from his night shift when raised voices caught his attention. A young woman, heavily pregnant and wrapped in a thin coat that did little to protect her from the bitter wind, stood facing a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who was gesturing angrily at a piece of paper in his hands. Marcus paused at the corner, not wanting to intrude but unable to ignore the scene unfolding before him. The woman's voice carried clearly in the crisp morning air as she pleaded for more time, explaining that her job at the diner had cut her hours, and she would have the rent money by the end of the week. The landlord's response was harsh and final. She had 3 days to pay in full or find somewhere else to live. As the landlord walked away, leaving Sarah standing alone on the sidewalk, Marcus caught sight of her face. She was younger than he had first thought, probably in her early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and exhaustion written in the lines around her eyes. Her hands rested protectively on her swollen belly, and for a moment she looked so lost and vulnerable that Marcus felt an unfamiliar urge to approach her, to offer help or at least words of comfort. But the moment passed, and his old habits kicked in. Marcus looked away and hurried up the stairs to his apartment, telling himself that other people's problems were not his concern. He had learned long ago that getting involved in other people's lives only led to complications and disappointment. Yet as he tried to sleep that morning, he found himself thinking about the pregnant woman's frightened eyes and the way she had unconsciously cradled her unborn child. Over the following days, Marcus began to notice Sarah more frequently. She worked at Murphy's Diner, a 24-hour restaurant 2 blocks from their neighborhood, and her schedule seemed to overlap with his coming and going. He would see her walking home in the early morning hours, her shoulders hunched against the cold, moving slowly due to her advanced pregnancy. Sometimes she carried a small bag of leftover food from the diner, and Marcus wondered if that was how she managed to eat on her limited budget. Sarah lived alone, as far as Marcus could tell. No boyfriend or husband seemed to visit her apartment, and she received no help carrying groceries or managing the daily challenges that came with being heavily pregnant and financially struggling. Marcus found himself unconsciously timing his departures for work to catch glimpses of her, though he was careful never to make eye contact or acknowledge her presence directly. One evening in early December, Marcus was leaving for his night shift when he heard crying coming from the alley beside Sarah's building. He hesitated, his natural instinct to avoid involvement warring with a growing concern that had been building since he first witnessed her confrontation with the landlord. The crying continued, soft but heartbreaking, and finally, Marcus forced himself to investigate. He found Sarah sitting on the fire escape outside her first-floor window, tears streaming down her face as she stared at an official-looking document in her hands. An eviction notice, Marcus realized, recognizing the standard legal language from similar notices he had seen posted on doors throughout the neighborhood. She had 3 days to vacate the premises or face removal by the sheriff's department. 4. A long moment Marcus stood in the shadows, unsure what to do. His entire adult life had been built around avoiding exactly this type of situation, where another person's crisis might pull him out of his comfortable isolation. But seeing Sarah's quiet desperation, the way she unconsciously rubbed her belly, as if trying to comfort both herself and her unborn child, something shifted inside him. "Are you all right?" The words came out rougher than he intended, startling both Sarah and himself. It was possibly the longest sentence he had spoken to a stranger in months. Sarah looked up, quickly wiping her eyes and trying to compose herself. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but her voice cracked on the words. "Just having a bad day." Marcus stepped closer, his hands awkwardly shoved in his jacket pockets. "I saw the eviction notice. That's more than just a bad day." She laughed, bitterly. "Yeah, well, when you're 8 months pregnant and can't make rent, every day feels like the end of the world." She paused, studying his face in the dim light from the street lamp. "I've seen you around. You live in the building next door, right? Above Mrs. Chen's store?" Marcus nodded, surprised that she had noticed him. "Marcus," he said simply. "Sarah." She gestured to the paper in her hands. "And this is my official notice that my baby and I are about to be homeless." The matter-of-fact way she said it, without self-pity but with a kind of resigned acceptance, hit Marcus harder than any dramatic outburst would have. Here was someone facing a genuine crisis, not asking for help, but simply stating the reality of her situation. Her strength in the face of such uncertainty reminded him of his mother during her better moments, before the pills and despair had taken over completely. "What happened?" Marcus asked, the question surprising him as much as his initial greeting had. Sarah shifted on the fire escape steps, wincing slightly as she adjusted her position. "The father took off when I told him about the baby. Said he wasn't ready to be tied down. My family thinks I'm an idiot for keeping the baby, so they've basically disowned me. I was managing okay on my diner wages until they started cutting everyone's hours because business is slow. Now I'm behind on everything and the landlord's done giving me extensions." She looked down at her belly, her expression softening despite her circumstances. "I keep telling myself that everything will work out once the baby's born, that I'll figure something out. But with 3 days to find a new place and no money for deposits or first month's rent." She trailed off, shaking her head. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the genuine desire to help another person, not because he was obligated to or because someone was forcing him, but because seeing Sarah's situation activated a part of him he thought had died long ago. The part that believed people deserved basic kindness and support, especially when they were trying their best in difficult circumstances. "How much do you need?" The question came out before he could stop it. Sarah looked up sharply. "What?" "For the rent. How much do you owe?" "I can't ask you for money. I don't even know you." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Marcus surprised himself with how steady his voice sounded. "How much?" Sarah studied his face, searching for some sign that this was a cruel joke or that he had ulterior motives. Finding neither, she said quietly, $800, plus late fees. It's almost $900. Marcus did quick mental math. His construction job paid well, and his minimal lifestyle meant he had been saving money without really thinking about it. He could cover her rent and still have plenty left over. The question wasn't whether he could afford to help, but whether he was willing to step outside the carefully maintained boundaries of his isolated life. Looking at Sarah's face, seeing the hope she was trying not to show, Marcus realized he had already made his decision. The next morning, Marcus stood outside Sarah's apartment door with $900 in cash and a stomach full of second thoughts. He had withdrawn the money from his savings account after work, telling himself that helping a pregnant woman avoid homelessness was simply the right thing to do. But now, faced with the prospect of actually handing over the money and becoming involved in someone else's life, his old instinct screamed at him to walk away. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it again. What if Sarah thought he had ulterior motives? What if she felt obligated to him afterward? What if this single act of kindness opened a door he wouldn't be able to close again? Marcus had spent so many years protecting himself from human connection that the thought of voluntarily entering into one Even a simple transaction between neighbors felt terrifying. Before he could change his mind and retreat to the safety of his own apartment, Sarah's door opened. She emerged carrying a laundry basket, moving slowly and carefully due to her pregnancy. When she saw Marcus standing in the hallway, her eyes widened with surprise. "Marcus, is everything okay?" He held out the envelope containing the cash, his words coming out in a rush. "For your rent, the full amount including late fees. Consider it a loan if that makes you more comfortable, but there's no timeline for paying it back and no interest." Sarah stared at the envelope as if it might disappear if she looked away. "I can't take this, it's too much. We barely know each other." "That's exactly why you can take it," Marcus replied, finding his voice steadier than he expected. "I'm not doing this because I want something from you. I'm doing it because it's right and because I can afford to help." Sarah set down her laundry basket and looked at him carefully. "Why? And please don't tell me it's just because it's the right thing to do. People walk past problems like mine every day without stopping to help." Marcus struggled to find words for feelings he didn't fully understand himself. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe because I know what it's like to feel alone and afraid. Maybe because someone should have helped my mother when she needed it and no one did. Maybe because you're trying to take care of your baby even when everything is falling apart, and that takes courage." The honesty in his answer seemed to reach Sarah in a way that simple charity couldn't. She took the envelope with shaking hands, and Marcus saw tears gathering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means." Marcus nodded awkwardly, already feeling the urge to escape back to his apartment. "I need to get some sleep. Night shift, you know." But as he turned to go, Sarah called after him. "Marcus, would you like to have coffee sometime? I mean, after I take care of the rent situation. I'd like to get to know the person who just saved my life." The invitation hung in the air between them like a bridge Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to cross. Coffee meant conversation, personal questions, the kind of human interaction he had been avoiding for years. But looking at Sarah's grateful smile and the hope in her eyes, he found himself nodding. "Yeah, okay. Coffee sounds good." 3 days later, they met at Murphy's Diner during Sarah's break. Marcus arrived early and chose a corner booth, positioning himself so he could see the entrance and exit, old habits of caution still governing his behavior. When Sarah appeared, moving between tables with practiced efficiency despite her pregnancy, he was struck again by her resilience and strength. She slid into the booth across from him, bringing 2 cups of coffee and a slice of apple pie. "On the house," she said with a smile. "Perk of working here." The first few minutes were awkward, filled with small talk about the weather and the neighborhood. But gradually, as Sarah shared stories about her regular customers at the diner and Marcus found himself responding with observations about the construction sites around the city, the conversation began to flow more naturally. "So what's your story?" Sarah asked eventually. "And I don't mean the basics like where you work and where you live. I mean, what made you into someone who lives alone and barely talks to anyone, but will hand a near stranger $900 without hesitation?" Marcus stirred his coffee slowly, buying time to decide how much of his history to share. "I grew up in a house where talking too much got you in trouble," he said finally. "My father was an angry drunk and my mother checked out early. I learned that keeping quiet and staying invisible was safer than being noticed." "That's a hard way to grow up." "It was what it was. I survived, got out, found work I was good at. The quiet life suited me." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "But you're not really living, are you? Just surviving?" The observation hit Marcus like a physical blow because it was so precisely accurate. "What about you?" he asked, deflecting attention from himself. "What's your story?" Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her belly. 23 years old, pregnant and alone, working at a diner to make ends meet. Not exactly the American dream. She paused, then continued. "But you know what? I'm not ashamed of my choices. This baby wasn't planned, but she's wanted, and I'm going to give her the best life I can, even if it means doing it alone." "She?" Sarah smiled for the first time since Marcus had met her, and it transformed her entire face. Found out last week. I'm having a daughter. I've been trying to think of names, but everything feels so permanent, you know? Like once I name her, that makes everything real. It's already real, Marcus said quietly. The name just makes it official. They talked for nearly an hour, longer than Marcus had, spoken continuously to another person in years. Sarah had a way of asking questions that didn't feel invasive, sharing stories that made him comfortable sharing his own, and listening without judgment. When her break ended and she had to return to work, Marcus felt oddly disappointed. Same time next week? Sarah asked as she stood to go. Marcus nodded, surprising himself. Yeah, I'd like that. Walking home, Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered world. For years he had told himself that isolation was protection, that emotional distance was safety. But sitting across from Sarah, sharing stories, and actually connecting with another human being, he had felt more alive than he had in years. The feeling scared him. Connection meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant the possibility of being hurt. But it also meant the possibility of something else, something Marcus had almost forgotten existed, the chance to matter to someone else, to be seen and known, and valued for who he was rather than simply tolerated for his reliability and quietness. As he climbed the stairs to his apartment, Marcus caught sight of Mrs. Chen arranging produce in her store window. She looked up and smiled, and for the first time in years Marcus smiled back. It was a small gesture, but it felt like the beginning of something larger, a crack in the walls he had built around himself that might eventually let in light. That night, as he prepared for his shift, Marcus found himself looking forward to the following week's coffee date with Sarah. It was a strange feeling, anticipating social interaction rather than dreading it, but not entirely unpleasant. Perhaps, he thought, there was more to life than simply surviving from one day to the next. Perhaps it was time to start learning how to actually live. Their weekly coffee meetings became the highlight of Marcus's week. Each Tuesday afternoon he would find himself actually looking forward to sitting across from Sarah at Murphy's Diner, sharing stories and learning more about the woman who had somehow managed to crack through his carefully constructed walls. Sarah was 8.5 months pregnant now, moving more slowly but still working her shifts with determination that Marcus found both admirable and concerning. During their fourth coffee meeting, Sarah winced suddenly, her hand flying to her side. Marcus leaned forward, alarmed. Are you okay? Just practice contractions, she said, breathing carefully until the sensation passed. The doctor says they're normal, but they're getting stronger. I think this little girl is getting ready to make her appearance. Marcus felt an unexpected surge of anxiety. Do you have everything ready for when the baby comes? Sarah's smile was tinged with exhaustion. Define ready. I have a crib that Mrs. Patterson from the 3rd floor gave me when her grandson outgrew it. Some baby clothes from the thrift store, diapers and formula because I'm not sure if breastfeeding will work out. The basics, I guess. What about getting to the hospital when you go into labor? The question seemed to hang in the air between them. Sarah looked down at her coffee cup, and Marcus realized he had touched on something she had been worrying about, but hadn't wanted to admit. I'll call an ambulance if I have to, she said quietly, or take a taxi if I have time. What if you don't have time? What if it happens in the middle of the night when cabs are scarce? Sarah looked up at him, and Marcus saw the fear she had been trying to hide. Then I'll figure it out. I always do. Without thinking, Marcus reached across the table and covered her hand with his. It was the first time he had voluntarily touched another person in years, and the simple contact sent an electric shock through both of them. You don't have to figure it out alone, he said. I live next door. If you need to get to the hospital, call me. Day or night, it doesn't matter. I'll drive you. Sarah stared at their joined hands, tears gathering in her eyes. Marcus, I can't keep asking you for help. You've already done so much. You're not asking, I'm offering. And what I did before, with the rent, that was about basic human decency. This is different. Marcus struggled to find words for what he was feeling. This is about friendship, about caring what happens to you and your daughter. The word friendship hung between them, and Marcus realized it was the first time he had used that word to describe a relationship with another person since he was a child. The admission felt both terrifying and liberating. Sarah squeezed his hand gently. Okay, but only if you let me cook you dinner sometime after the baby's born. I make a mean spaghetti and meatballs, and it's the least I can do to thank you. You don't need to thank me. Maybe not, Sarah smiled. But I want to. 2 weeks later, Marcus was awakened from his daytime sleep by urgent knocking on his door. He stumbled out of bed, disoriented and groggy, to find Mrs. Chen standing in his hallway looking frantic. Marcus, you must come quickly. The pregnant girl Sarah, she is in trouble. I heard screaming from her apartment. Marcus was fully awake instantly. He grabbed his keys and followed Mrs. Chen down the stairs, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar mixture of fear and protective instinct. Outside Sarah's door, they could hear labored breathing and soft moans of pain. Marcus knocked firmly but gently. Sarah, it's Marcus. Are you okay? The baby's coming, came Sarah's strained voice through the door. I tried to call a taxi, but the contractions are too close together. I don't think I can make it to the hospital. Marcus turned to Mrs. Chen. Call 911. Tell them we need an ambulance for a woman in labor. Then he called through the door. Sarah, I'm coming in, okay? He found Sarah on her living room floor, having made a nest of blankets and towels. She was breathing in short, sharp gasps, her face flushed and sweaty. When she saw Marcus, relief flooded her features. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice smaller than he had ever heard it. Marcus knelt beside her, his own fear transforming into calm determination. It's going to be okay. The ambulance is coming, and until they get here, I'm not going anywhere. You don't know anything about delivering babies. No, but I know about you. I know you're the strongest person I've ever met, and if anyone can do this, it's you. Sarah's next contraction hit with fierce intensity, and she gripped Marcus's hand, so tightly he was sure she would break bones. But he didn't pull away. Instead, he found himself coaching her through the breathing techniques he half remembered from movies and TV shows, his voice steady and reassuring even though his heart was racing. I can see the head, Mrs. Chen called from where she had positioned herself to help. The baby is coming now. What happened next would remain forever etched in Marcus's memory. In the space of 10 minutes, he watched Sarah summon reserves of strength he hadn't known existed, pushing through pain and exhaustion to bring her daughter into the world. When the baby finally emerged, crying and red-faced and absolutely perfect, Marcus felt something break open in his chest. Mrs. Chen, who had assisted with births in her native China, efficiently cleaned and wrapped the baby while they waited for the paramedics. When she placed the tiny girl in Sarah's arms, the look of pure love and wonder on Sarah's face made Marcus understand what people meant when they talked about miracles. She's beautiful, he whispered, and he meant it. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with dark, alert eyes that seemed to take in everything. Would you like to hold her? Sarah asked, and before Marcus could protest that he didn't know how, the baby was in his arms. She was so small, so fragile, yet she felt substantial in a way that surprised him. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, and when she looked up at him with those serious dark eyes, Marcus felt something he had never experienced before. The overwhelming desire to protect and nurture another human being. What are you going to name her? He asked. Sarah smiled, exhausted but radiant. Hope, her name is Hope. The paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, pronouncing both mother and baby healthy and stable. As they prepared to transport Sarah and Hope to the hospital for observation, Sarah caught Marcus's hand. Thank you, she said, for being here, for not letting me go through this alone. I don't know what I would have done without you. Marcus looked down at baby Hope, who was sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, then back at Sarah. You would have been fine. You're stronger than you know. Maybe. But it was better not having to find out. As Marcus watched the ambulance drive away, he realized that his carefully constructed life of isolation had been forever changed. He had witnessed the birth of new life, had been trusted with someone's most vulnerable moment, had felt genuine love and connection for the first time in decades. Standing on the sidewalk in the afternoon sunlight, Marcus understood that there was no going back to his old life. He had been pulled from the emotional grave he had dug for himself, and the world suddenly seemed full of possibilities he had never allowed himself to imagine. Hope had been born, and with her, something new had been born in Marcus as well. The first few weeks after Hope's birth transformed Marcus's world in ways he never could have anticipated. What started as occasional check-ins on Sarah and the baby evolved into daily visits, then helping with grocery shopping and late-night feedings when Hope was fussy. Marcus found himself learning about infant care through trial and error, discovering that he had a natural instinct for soothing the crying baby when Sarah was exhausted. Sarah, S maternity leave from the diner was unpaid, which meant money was tighter than ever despite Marcus's earlier help with rent. He began quietly leaving groceries outside her door, claiming he had bought too much or that Mrs. Chen had given him extras from the store. Sarah protested at first, but when Hope needed formula and diapers, practical necessity overruled her pride. "You're doing too much," Sarah said one evening as Marcus rocked Hope while Sarah heated a bottle. "I feel like I'm taking advantage of your kindness." Marcus looked down at the baby in his arms, marveling at how natural it felt to hold her. "You're not taking advantage of anything. This is what people do for each other. What family does." The word slipped out before he could stop it, and both he and Sarah froze. Family. It was a concept Marcus had avoided thinking about for years, associated as it was with pain and disappointment. But sitting in Sarah's tiny living room, holding Hope while her mother prepared dinner, it felt exactly like what Marcus imagined a real family should be. "Is that what we are?" Sarah asked quietly. "Family?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I don't know what else to call it. You two are the most important people in my life. I care about what happens to you more than I've ever cared about anything. If that's not family, it's close enough." Sarah smiled, and Marcus saw tears in her eyes. "I'd like that. Hope and I could use some family." As winter deepened into spring, their unconventional family unit solidified. Marcus's work schedule actually made him the perfect person to help with nighttime feedings and early morning care, while Sarah caught up on sleep. He found himself singing lullabies he remembered from his own childhood, songs his mother had sung before the darkness took her. Hope seemed to respond to his voice, often settling down when he held her and spoke in low, gentle tones. The other construction workers began to notice changes in Marcus. He smiled more, spoke up during breaks to share stories about Hope's latest achievements, and even accepted an invitation to join the crew for drinks after a particularly successful project completion. Big Jim Morrison cornered him one Friday night, curious about the transformation. "You're different lately, Thompson. More, I don't know, present. What's going on?" Marcus found himself talking about Sarah and Hope, explaining the situation in more words than he typically used in a month. Big Jim listened with growing amusement and approval. "So you've got yourself a ready-made family," Big Jim concluded. "Good for you. Life's too short to spend it alone." The comment stayed with Marcus as he walked home that night. Ready-made family. It wasn't how he would have described it, but there was truth in the observation. He hadn't chosen this situation, but he had chosen to embrace it, and the choice had changed everything about how he saw himself and his place in the world. Mrs. Chen had also noticed the changes, watching with warm approval as Marcus came and went from Sarah's apartment with baby supplies and takeout dinners. One afternoon, she stopped him as he climbed the stairs with a bag of groceries. "You are good, man," she said in her careful English. "Sarah and baby lucky to have you." "I think I'm the lucky one," Marcus replied, surprised by his own honesty. Mrs. Chen nodded knowingly. "Best families are ones we choose, not ones we born into." When Hope was 3 months old, Sarah returned to work part-time at the diner. Marcus adjusted his schedule so he could watch Hope during Sarah's shifts, discovering that he loved the quiet hours spent feeding and playing with the baby. Hope had begun smiling regularly, and Marcus was convinced her brightest smiles were reserved for him. One evening, as Sarah prepared for her night shift and Marcus settled in with Hope for the evening, disaster struck without warning. Sarah was hurrying down the stairs from her apartment when she caught her heel on a loose board, sending her tumbling down the entire flight. Marcus heard the crash and Hope's startled crying from inside the apartment and rushed out to find Sarah, lying motionless at the bottom of the stairs. Sarah. Marcus knelt beside her, his heart pounding as he checked for signs of consciousness. She was breathing but unresponsive, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. Her left leg was bent at an unnatural angle, clearly broken. Mrs. Chen appeared with a phone already in hand. "I call ambulance," she announced, her voice steady despite the crisis. Marcus' mind raced through the immediate problems. Sarah needed medical attention urgently, but Hope was upstairs crying and needed care too. The baby couldn't go to the hospital, but Sarah couldn't be left alone either. "Mrs. Chen, can you watch Hope while I go to the hospital with Sarah?" "Of course, you take care of her mama, I take care of baby." The next several hours blurred together in a nightmare of emergency rooms, medical forms, and desperate worry.